It was a muggy summer evening in Houston, as it always was in June 2018. The air smelled of asphalt and jasmine, and Collins's dealership was buzzing with activity. Jake Collins, tall, with perfectly coiffed dark hair and a smile honed by years of sales, stood at the door, shaking hands with guests. His tie was slightly loosened, his jacket casually unbuttoned, the look of a man who knew how to fit in anywhere. Tonight's benefit was his idea, to bring together local bigwigs, raise money for a children's hospital, and burnish his reputation ahead of a city council election. "Mr. Collins, this is a great event," said the older man in the cowboy hat, squeezing Jake's hand tightly. "If you run this city like this, I'll vote for you." "Thanks, Ted," Jake replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "But it's not about me today, it's about the kids, right?" Ted laughed, and Jake had already turned to the next guest, not missing a single face. He was in his element, smiles, compliments, light jokes, but his eyes kept searching for Laura. Laura Collins stood at the refreshment table, wearing a simple blue dress that showed off her slender figure. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a low bun, and her smile, polite but distant, was constant. She poured punch, exchanging a few words with her guests, looking the perfect hostess. Only her fingers, clutching the edge of the table, betrayed the tension. "Laura, my dear, you are simply radiant today," said Marge, the local banker's wife, adjusting her pearl earrings. "Thank you, Marge," Laura replied, smiling a little wider. "It's just nice to see everyone." But inside, she was counting the minutes until the evening was over. These events had been a part of her life for 15 years, since Jake had opened his first car dealership. Back then, she had believed in his dreams and was proud of his energy. Now she felt like a mannequin on display. Her own dreams, paints, canvases, galleries had long been gathering dust in the garage. "Mom, can I go?" Emma's voice rang out. Laura turned around. Her 16-year-old daughter stood next to her, arms crossed. Black jeans, a torn t-shirt with a rock band logo, and dark eyeliner made her look out of place among the smartly dressed crowd. "Emma, we agreed," Laura said quietly. "This is important for Dad." "I don't give a damn about Dad's elections," Emma muttered, looking away. "It's boring here, and all these people are fake." Laura sighed. She wanted to object, but something in her daughter's stubborn gaze reminded her of herself in her youth. "Okay," she said finally, "but be home by 10, and text me when you get to Kate's." Emma nodded, already typing a message to her friend, and a minute later she disappeared through the door. Laura watched her go, feeling a pang of guilt. She knew Emma had become distant, but she didn't know how to fix it. "Is everything okay?" A voice came from behind. Laura turned around and saw Robert Wilson. His dark suit fit perfectly, and there was a familiar warmth in his eyes. Robert was an old friend of Jake's from high school, but Laura always felt an ease with him that she didn't have with others. "Yeah, just Emma," Laura replied with a shrug. "Teenagers, you know." "Oh, I know," Robert chuckled. "My niece dyed her hair green last year. My parents are still in shock." Laura laughed, the tension in her shoulders relaxing a little. "How are you, Laura?" Robert asked, lowering his voice. "Long time no see." She hesitated. She wanted to tell the truth, that she was tired of being Jake's shadow, that her life was spent in endless dinners and smiling for strangers. But instead she said, "Everything is fine. And you, I heard that you've had changes." Robert looked away. His divorce from Carol was a fresh topic in their circle, and Laura immediately regretted mentioning it. "Yet it's complicated," he said, but quickly changed the subject. "Listen, I was at the gallery last week. There was a show of local artists. I thought about you. You were painting, weren't you?" Laura froze. Her paintings. She had once dreamed of having her own exhibition, but after Emma was born, and then Tommy, all that was in the past. "I haven't picked up a brush for a long time," she admitted, looking into her glass. "You shouldn't have," Robert said. "You had talent. I remember that picture of the sunset over the bay. It's still in my mind's eye." Laura felt a warmth in her chest. No one except Jake, in the early years of their marriage, had ever spoken about her work like that. "Thank you," she said quietly. Their conversation was interrupted by Jake's loud laughter. He was standing in the center of the room, telling a joke to a group of businessmen. His gaze slid over Laura and Robert, and for a second his smile faltered. But he quickly turned away, continuing his story. Laura didn't notice. She was looking at Robert, who was talking about a new program at the gallery courses for adults who wanted to return to art. "Maybe you should try," he asked. "It's never too late." "I don't know," Laura answered. "I have children, things to do." "Laura, you deserve something for yourself," Robert said, and his voice was so sincere that she was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, in the corner of the showroom, behind the glass door of Jake's office, sat Tommy. A 10-year-old boy with a shaggy fringe. He was drawing in a notebook with a pencil in his hand. His sneakers were dangling under his chair, and half-eaten chips were lying on the table. Tommy hated these evenings. The noise, the adults who stroked his head and asked him what he wanted to be. He preferred his comic books, where the heroes always won. "Tommy, where are you?" Jake's voice rang out. The boy winced and hid the notebook under the table. The door opened and Jake walked in, loosening his tie. "So, champion, are you hiding?" he asked, trying to smile, but his voice was tired. "Just drawing," Tommy muttered, not looking at his father. Jake looked at his son, wanted to say something, but his phone rang. "One moment," he said, answering. "Yes, Harry, I'm listening." "No, the figures are ready." Tommy sighed and went back to his drawing of a superhero in a red cape saving the city. He didn't know why his dad was always busy, but he felt something was wrong. In the hall, the evening went on as usual. Laura said goodbye to Robert as he left to join other guests and return to her duties. But his words about the course stuck in her head. She looked at Jake, who was now talking to the mayor, and felt a pang of loneliness. They had once been a team, building dreams together. Now she wasn't sure if he remembered who she was. "Laura, can you help with the auction?" Jake called across the room. She nodded, forcing a smile. But something inside her snapped. She was tired of being a decoration. Maybe Robert was right. Maybe it was time to change something. The evening ended close to midnight. The guests had left, the waiters were clearing the tables, and Jake was counting the money he had collected. Laura was sitting in the car, checking her phone. A text from Emma, "I'm at Kate's. Everything is okay." Laura responded with a smiley face, but her mind was elsewhere. "Nice evening," Jake said, getting behind the wheel. "I think we made about 20 grand. "Great," Laura replied, looking out the window. "Are you okay?" he asked, glancing at her. "I'm just tired," she said. Jake nodded without pressing. He turned on the radio, and George Strait's voice filled the car. Laura closed her eyes, imagining a blank canvas and the smell of paint. She didn't know where to start, but for the first time in years, she felt like she wanted to try. At home, they checked that Tommy was asleep and went to their rooms. Jake went to bed, but his thoughts were not limited to the auction. He remembered Laura laughing with Robert and frowned. It didn't mean anything, he told himself. But doubt was already creeping in. Laura stood in the bathroom, looking at her reflection. Her fingers still smelled of punch, and Robert's words were playing in her head. "You deserve something for yourself." She took a deep breath and decided tomorrow she would call the gallery. Emma was lying on her friend's couch, scrolling through her phone. She saw her mother talking to that lawyer, and she didn't like it. Leave a like and subscribe. For you, a button is a moment. For the channel, a step forward. Don't forget to share where you listen to us from Returning to History. Mornings at the Collins house began with the usual chaos. Laura stood at the stove, frying pancakes, while Tommy, still in his dinosaur pajamas, drew at the kitchen table. His pencils were scattered, and another superhero was appearing on the paper. Emma flew into the kitchen, grabbed a banana and a backpack, muttering something about being late. "Emma, have a proper breakfast," Laura said, without looking up from the frying pan. "No time," Emma said, already heading for the door. "See you later." The door slammed and Laura sighed. She looked at Tommy, who was intently shading his hero's cape. "Tommy, eat before it gets cold," she said softly, placing the plate in front of him. "Yeah, right," he muttered without looking up. Laura sat across from him, holding a mug of coffee. Her thoughts were far from the kitchen. The conversation with Robert last night was on her mind. His words about her paintings, about her talent, about her deserving something for herself, awakened something long forgotten. She opened her phone and found the gallery's website. Adult painting classes were starting in a week. Registration was open. "Mom, why are you so thoughtful?" Tommy asked, biting into a pancake. Laura smiled. "Just thinking about the old days," she replied. "You know, I used to draw a lot." "How am I?" he asked, pointing to his drawing with his pencil. "Well, almost," Laura laughed. "Just without superheroes. More flowers and the sea." Tommy shrugged, as if it wasn't so cool, and went back to what he was doing. Laura looked at him, and her heart sank. She loved her children more than anything in the world, but sometimes she felt like she was lost in their lives, losing herself. Jake walked into the kitchen, already in a suit, with a phone to his ear. "Yes, Harry, I understand. I'll meet you at 2, he said, ending the call. "Good morning, champion. Laura, are you okay?" "Uh-huh," she replied, though his question sounded more out of politeness. "Are you late today?" "Most likely," Jake said, pouring coffee into a thermos. "Negotiations with a new supplier. If everything works out, we'll open another salon by the end of the year." "Great," Laura said, but her voice was even. Jake looked at her as if he wanted to add something, but instead he patted Tommy on the shoulder. "Don't be late for school, kid." "Dad, I'm not a kid," Tommy said indignantly, and Jake laughed as he walked away. As the door closed behind him, Laura picked up her phone and, without giving herself time to change her mind, filled out a form on the gallery's website. Painting classes. Tuesday and Thursday, 6 p.m. She hit send and exhaled. It was a small step, but it felt huge. A week later, Laura stood outside a gallery in downtown Houston. Her jeans and white shirt were unusually loose after Jake's event dresses. She held an old sketchbook she'd found in the garage. Her heart was pounding, like before a first date. Inside, the gallery was bright, with high ceilings and the smell of paint. The walls were covered with paintings by local artists, bright landscapes, abstract blobs, portraits. Laura felt her fingers itch to create. "Laura Collins," a voice said. She turned around and saw Robert. He was wearing a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up, holding a folder. His smile was as warm as it had been at the car dealership party. "Robert, you work here?" Laura was surprised. "Not exactly," he replied, grinning. "I'm a volunteer. I help organize the courses. And today I'm filling in for the presenter. You signed up, right?" "Yes," Laura said, feeling a little awkward. "I didn't expect to see you." "A pleasant surprise, I hope?" he asked, a sparkle in his eyes. Laura nodded, though she was conflicted between embarrassment and joy. She wasn't sure if it was right to spend time with Robert, especially after the way Jake had looked at them at the party. But she pushed the thought aside. It was just a course. Nothing more. The group was small, about 10 people, mostly women her age. Robert began the lesson by talking about basic watercolor techniques. His voice was calm, confident, and Laura found herself listening not only to his words, but also to his intonations. He spoke of color, light, emotion, and it was so far from Jake's world of numbers and deals. "Try drawing something that inspires you," Robert said, handing out the sheets. "Don't think about the result. Just feel it." Laura opened the sketchbook and picked up a brush. Her hand was shaking, but after a few minutes she began to apply brushstrokes. The sea, the sunset, the waves, images from her youth, when she dreamed of exhibiting in New York. She didn't notice Robert approaching her. "This is beautiful," he said, looking at her sketch. "You have a light hand." "Thank you," Laura replied, feeling her cheeks burn. "I haven't drawn for a long time." "Then you must continue," he said. "It's like breathing." If you stop, you'll suffocate. Laura looked at him, and their eyes met for a second. She quickly looked away, focusing on the paper. After class, Robert suggested they grab coffee at a cafe across the street. Laura hesitated, but agreed. They sat at a table by the window, and the conversation flowed easily. Robert told her about his youth, how he wanted to be a musician but chose law for stability. Laura shared how she gave up art after Emma was born. I thought it was temporary, she admitted, looking into her cup. And then the years passed, and I just forgot who I was. You haven't forgotten, Robert said. You're here. This is the beginning. Laura smiled, but her thoughts were interrupted by a call. Jake. Sorry, she said, answering. Yes, Jake? Where are you? He asked. His voice was sharp. It's already 7, and you're not home. I'm taking painting classes, Laura replied, trying to speak calmly. I told you this morning. Oh, right, Jake said, but there was irritation in his tone. Okay, when will you be there? Soon, she replied and hung up. Robert noticed her tension, but said nothing. I have to go, Laura said, standing up. Thank you for the coffee. See you Thursday, he replied, and his smile was soft, but there was something else in it. Laura found Jake at home, and in the living room, he was watching the news, holding a beer. Tommy was already asleep, and Emma was in her room. How are the courses? Jake asked, not looking up from the screen. Okay, Laura replied, taking off her jacket. I liked it. Great, he said, but his voice was empty. Laura wanted to talk about the painting, about the sea, about how the brush came to life in her hands. But she looked at Jake and changed her mind. I'm tired, she said. I'm going to bed. Calm down, he replied, and that was all. It was Saturday morning, and the Collins house smelled of coal and freshly cut grass. The yard was full of people, neighbors, friends, Jake's clients, all gathered for the Collins annual barbecue in their spacious garden. Strings of lights swayed over long tables laden with salad bowls, ribs, and pitchers of lemonade. Country music blared from the speakers, and children raced through the grass, chasing fireflies. Jake stood at the grill, flipping steaks. His polo shirt was slightly damp from the heat, but he had a smile on his face. He loved days like these when his house became the center of Houston, and he was the king of the evening. Jake, when are you running for mayor? Bill, a local contractor, shouted, raising a bottle of beer. First to the city council, Bill, Jake replied with a wink. And then we'll see. The crowd laughed, and Jake felt a familiar surge of pride. But his gaze slid to Laura, who stood at the refreshment table, setting out paper plates. She was wearing a light sundress, her hair down, and she looked different. Not like she did at his events, where she played hostess. There was something alive about her today, almost youthful. Laura, oblivious to her husband's gaze, chatted with her neighbor Sarah. Her hands moved quickly, but carefully. Years of practice at these kinds of parties had made her a master of multitasking. Sarah, try this sauce, Laura said, holding out the bowl. Tommy was helping stir it. Oh, your boy is a chef already? Sarah smiled, taking a chip. He's just dreaming for now, Laura answered, but her smile was sincere. She felt lighter than usual. The painting courses she had been attending for the second week were giving her energy. Every brushstroke, every conversation with Robert brought her back to Laura, who had once believed in her dreams. She had even begun to think about her own exhibition timidly for now, but the thought warmed her. Laura, do you need help? A voice called. She turned to see Robert. He was wearing jeans and a dark shirt, holding a bottle of water. His presence at the barbecue wasn't unexpected. He was a regular at the Collins, but Laura still felt a twinge of awkwardness. Oh, Robert, hi, she said, smoothing her hair. Yes, if you like, you can lay out some napkins. Yes, sir, boss, he replied with a smile and began laying out napkins with exaggerated seriousness. Laura laughed, and their conversation flowed easily. They discussed the latest gallery show, where Laura had seen a painting that had inspired her new sketch. Robert listened attentively, nodding, asking questions. "You have to show me your work," he said. "Seriously, Laura, do you have anything I haven't seen?" "Just sketches so far," she replied with a shrug. "Nothing special." "I don't believe it," he said, and his voice was so warm that Laura couldn't help but smile wider. Their conversation attracted glances. Sarah, standing nearby, whispered something to her friend, and both looked at Laura and Robert. The two women at the next table also leaned toward each other, covering their mouths with their hands. Emma, sitting on the swing in the corner of the garden, noticed this. She was chatting with her friend Kate, but her eyes were on her mother. Laura laughed, touching Robert's hand as he handed her a stack of napkins. It was a small thing, but to Emma it seemed wrong. "Kate, did you see?" Emma said quietly, nodding towards Laura. "What?" Kate asked, munching on her French fries. "Mom and that lawyer," Emma replied, squinting. "They talk all the time." "So what?" Kate shrugged. "He's your dad's friend." "I don't know," Emma muttered. "Something's wrong." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her messages, but her mind was busy. Her mom had been acting strange since she started this course. Emma decided she would keep a closer eye on things. Meanwhile, Jake, having handed the grill to an assistant, went to the table for a beer. His phone rang another investor, wanting to discuss expanding the car dealership. "Just a minute, Harry," Jake said, covering the phone. He looked up to see Laura and Robert. They were standing close, laughing about something, and Robert leaned slightly toward her, showing her something on his phone. Jake frowned. This wasn't the first time. He'd noticed them chatting at the charity event 2 weeks ago and brushed it off. But now it seems too much. "Harry, I'll call you back," Jake said and hung up. He walked towards Laura, trying to keep a smile on his face. "Hey, what do we have here?" he asked, standing between Laura and Robert. Laura flinched as if she had been caught doing something. "Oh, Jake," she said, taking a step back. "We were just talking about the gallery. Robert was telling me about the new show." "Yeah," Robert nodded, straightening up. "There's a couple of cool pieces there. Laura should check them out." "Uh-huh," Jake said, looking at Robert. His voice was even, but his eyes narrowed. "Laura, can you help with desserts? The guests are already asking." "Of course," Laura replied, feeling the tension. She went to the pie table, and Jake stayed with Robert. "How are you, Bob?" he asked, opening a beer. "Fine," Robert replied, shrugging. "Work, courses at the gallery. And you?" "I'm busy," Jake said, "but you know I like to be in control." He took a sip, keeping his eyes on Robert. Robert nodded, but the conversation died down. Robert moved on to join the other guests, and Jake watched him go, clutching the bottle a little tighter than necessary. Laura felt her cheeks heat up as she laid out the pies. Jake was never rude, but his tone had been harsh. She told herself it didn't matter. She and Robert were just friends, but her heart still beat faster. The evening went on. The guests ate, laughed, and danced to an old Toba Keith hit. Tommy sat on the grass with the boys from school, discussing the new superhero movie. "Batman has a cooler car," said his friend Oliver. "Nah, my hero's better," Tommy countered. "He's got a flying motorcycle." "You came up with it?" Oliver asked, his eyes wide. "Yeah," Tommy answered proudly. "I'll draw it tomorrow." He was happy, but sometimes he looked at his parents. Dad looked tense, and Mom seemed distant. Tommy didn't understand what was happening, but he didn't like it. Emma, meanwhile, had moved to the fence where there were fewer people. She opened her phone and texted Kate. "Mom's been chatting with that Bob guy again. Dad's looking angry." Kate responded, "Maybe they're just friends." Emma rolled her eyes and put her phone away. She knew the adults were hiding the truth. Her friend from school had told her about her mom leaving her for someone else, and Emma was afraid that their family was heading in the same direction. As the evening wore on, the guests began to leave. Laura was clearing the tables. Jake was saying goodbye to his last friends. Robert approached Laura, holding an empty bowl. "Thank you for the evening," he said. "It was great." I'm glad you liked it, Laura replied, smiling. See you at the course, he asked. Yes, of course, she said, but her voice was quieter than usual. Robert left, and Laura looked at Jake. He was standing by the grill, wiping his hands on a towel, looking at her. His face was unreadable, but Laura felt a chill. Jake, are you okay? She asked, coming over. I'm fine, he replied, but his smile was strained. Just tired. They began to clean together, but the silence between them was heavy. Laura wanted to ask what was wrong, but she didn't dare. Instead, she focused on the dishes, trying not to think about the look in Jake's eyes. When they finally got inside, Tommy was already asleep on the couch, clutching his notebook. Emma was sitting in her room, listening to music through her headphones. Laura carried Tommy to his bed, adjusting the covers. She looked at his face so peaceful in sleep and felt a pang of guilt. She didn't want the kids to see her and Jake fighting. Jake was sitting in the living room, scrolling through his phone. Laura came over and sat down next to him. It was good today, she said, trying to lighten the mood. The guests are happy. Yeah, he replied without looking at her, especially some of them. Laura froze. What do you mean? She asked. It's okay, Jake said, standing up. I'm going to shower. He walked away, leaving Laura alone. She sat there, staring at the blank TV screen, her heart sinking. She knew Jake had spotted her with Robert, but she hadn't done anything wrong, or had she? Rain pounded the windows of the Collins house, turning Tuesday night into a gray, dreary haze. Laura sat in her small studio, a former storage room she'd recently cleared out for painting. On her easel sat an unfinished watercolor of a sunset over the bay, with soft orange and blue washes. Her hands were stained with paint, and there were brushes and jars of water on the table. She'd returned from art class a few hours earlier, still feeling the slight rush of the class. But now, at home, that feeling was fading under the weight of the silence that had settled between her and Jake since the barbecue. Downstairs in the living room, Jake sat on the couch, flipping through reports on the car dealership. His laptop was flashing numbers, but his eyes kept drifting to the stairs. He could hear Laura fiddling around upstairs, and it irritated him. She was disappearing into her studio more and more often, returning from classes with this new light in her eyes, and Jake couldn't help but think that it was more than just the drawing. The image of Robert laughing with Laura at a barbecue was seared into his mind. "Dad, can I play on the console?" Tommy asked as he walked into the room. His hair was disheveled, and he was holding a notebook with another superhero sketch in it. "Not now, champ," Jake replied, not looking at his son. "Do your homework." Tommy frowned, but didn't argue. He plopped down in the chair, opened his notebook, and began to draw, glancing at his father. Jake was in a bad mood, and Tommy could sense it. He didn't understand why his parents were so tense lately, but he felt uneasy. Upstairs, Emma sat in her room, headphones drowning out the sound of the rain. She scrolled through her phone, but her mind was on her mother. She had been keeping an even closer eye on Laura since the barbecue. Today, when her mother returned from class, Emma had noticed her smiling, humming as she cooked dinner. It wasn't like her usual tired mother. Emma decided it was time to take action. She went down to the living room, but when she saw her father's grim expression, she decided against talking to him. Instead, she headed for Laura's workshop. "Mom, are you there?" Emma knocked, opening the door slightly. Laura winced and put her brush down. "Yes, Emma, come in," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Emma walked in, arms crossed. Her gaze ran over the easel, the brushes, the scattered pencils. "Are you here all the time now?" she asked, squinting. "Not all the time," Laura answered, trying to smile. "Just drawing. Want to see?" Emma shrugged, but walked over to the easel. The painting was beautiful, but she wasn't interested. "Is it because of those courses?" she asked. "You're so weird now." Laura frowned. "Weird? Emma, I'm just doing what I love." "What's wrong?" "I don't know," Emma muttered. "You're just not the same, and that Bob is always around." Laura froze. She hadn't expected Emma to notice her interaction with Robert. "Emma, Robert's just helping with the classes," she said, trying to sound calm. "He's Dad's friend. Nothing special." Emma rolled her eyes. "Yeah, right. I'm not blind, Mom." Laura felt irritation boiling inside her. She wanted to explain, but at that moment Jake appeared in the doorway. His face was as dark as the cloud outside the window. "What's that noise?" he asked, looking at Laura. "I'm trying to work." "Nothing," Laura said quickly. "Emma just came by to chat." Emma snorted and walked out, slamming the door. Laura looked at Jake, hoping he would leave, but he remained, arms crossed. "So what was that?" he asked, nodding towards the door. "Teenagers," Laura replied with a shrug. "You know Emma." But Jake didn't look away. He stepped closer, and Laura felt the air between them thicken. "Laura, what's going on?" he asked, lowering his voice. "You're always on these courses, coming home late, and now Emma's sniffing around. Is it because of Robert?" Laura was taken aback. She had expected Jake to notice her interaction with Robert, but she hadn't expected him to accuse her so directly. "Jake, are you serious?" she said, putting down her brush. "Robert's just a mentor. We're talking about art, that's all." "Art," Jake repeated, and there was bitterness in his voice. "Do you think I don't see the way he looks at you? The way you two chatter like old lovers?" Laura felt the blood rush to her cheeks. "It's not fair," she said, raising her voice. "I'm finally doing something for myself, and you see it as cheating." "What am I supposed to think?" Jake snapped. "You're out laughing with my friend, and when you get home you barely talk to me." "Maybe because you never listen," Laura cried. "I'm just furniture to you, Jake. You only see your business, your choices, your plans." Her words hung in the air. Jake looked at her, pain flashing in his eyes, but it quickly turned to anger. "Furniture," he said, gritting his teeth. "I work hard to make sure we have everything, Laura. And what are you doing? Flirting with Bob and painting your sunsets." Laura choked on her hurt. She wanted to answer, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she turned to the easel, grabbed the painting, and threw it on the floor. "The paper store," the paint ran. "Here are my sunsets," she said, her voice trembling. "Are you happy?" Jake looked at the ruined painting and his face softened for a second, but he didn't apologize. "I'm going to the office," he said, turned around and left. Laura was left alone. She sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. Tears burned her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She heard Jake go downstairs and his office door slam. The rain outside grew heavier, and its noise was the only sound in the room. Tommy, sitting in the living room, heard the screams. He hunched over in his chair, clutching his pencil so tightly that it cracked. His notebook was open to the drawing, but now the hero looked less strong. Tommy didn't understand why Mom and Dad were arguing, but he was scared. He quietly got up and went to his room, deciding to hide under the covers. Emma, standing at the foot of the stairs, overheard the entire conversation. Her heart was pounding. She knew her mother hadn't cheated on her, at least not yet. But her father's words, his anger, confirmed her worst fears. She went back to her room and opened her laptop. She needed proof. She knew the password to her mother's phone. She'd once spied on Laura typing it. Emma decided to check the messages when her mother was asleep. Laura sat in her studio, staring at the torn painting. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't expected Jake to explode like that. And his words, flirting with Bob, had hurt more than she cared to admit. She hadn't been flirting. Or had she? Robert had been kind, thoughtful, and his interest in her art had made her feel alive. But this hadn't been an affair. Or had it? She stood up, gathered up her brushes, and put them away in a drawer. She needed a distraction. She went down to the kitchen to make some tea, but ran into Tommy, who was creeping up to his room with a notebook in his hands. "Tommy, why aren't you in bed?" Laura asked, trying to speak calmly. "I don't want to sleep," he muttered, looking at the floor. Laura sat down next to him. "Hey, it's okay," she said, though her voice was shaking. Dad and I just had a little argument. It happens. Tommy looked at her, his eyes full of worry. Are you getting divorced? He asked quietly. Laura felt her heart squeeze. No, baby, she said, hugging him. We're just tired. Everything will be okay. But Tommy didn't look convinced. He nodded and went into his room. Laura stayed in the hallway, feeling like a terrible mother. She went back to the workshop and found Tommy's notebook, which he had accidentally left on the table. On the last page was a drawing, a dark sky, a broken house, and a lonely superhero standing in the rain. Laura closed the notebook, and now the tears finally started to flow. Later, when the house was quiet, Emma snuck into her parents' bedroom. Laura was asleep, and her phone was on the nightstand. Emma quickly entered her password, opened her messages, and scrolled through the chat with Robert. There were discussions about courses, a couple of links to exhibitions, nothing suspicious. Emma exhaled, but relief gave way to irritation. If Mom wasn't cheating, why was Dad so angry? She put the phone away and went back to her room, deciding to keep watching. Jake sat in his office, looking at the photo of their wedding on his desk. Laura in a white dress, he in a tuxedo, both laughing. He didn't want to fight, but he couldn't stop. Robert, the course, Laura's new energy, it all felt like a threat. He finished the whiskey he'd poured himself after the fight and closed his laptop. Eating needed to talk to Laura, but not today. He was too angry today. Laura lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Jake, about his accusations, about Tommy, about herself. Her marriage was falling apart, and she didn't know how to save it. But she didn't want to give up on her course, on her new life. For the first time in years, she felt like herself, and that was too valuable to give up. Wednesday morning in Houston was bright, but the Collins household was quiet, heavy as before a storm. Laura and Jake had barely spoken since their argument in the workshop. Breakfast was silent. Laura made toast. Jake scrolled through his phone. Emma left for school without a word, and Tommy ate cereal while staring at the table. Tension hung in the air, and everyone felt it in their own way. Laura stood at the sink, washing dishes. Her thoughts were racing back to the day before. Jake had gone to his office after an argument, and they hadn't spoken until morning. His words, flirting with Bob, had stung like a slap. She hadn't been flirting. Her conversations with Robert had been about paintings, about the gallery, about what made her feel alive. But now she wondered, had she crossed a line? She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away, and decided to focus on the day. Today was painting class, and she wasn't going to miss it. Jake sat in his office at the dealership, staring at his computer screen. The sales numbers were good, but he couldn't concentrate. The argument with Laura the night before had left a bad taste in his mouth. He didn't want to yell, but her defense of Robert, her new independence, was hurting his pride. He'd always thought their marriage was solid, but now he could see the cracks. And worst of all, he didn't know how to fix them. Mr. Collins, Harry Walsh is here to see you, said the secretary, peering in the door. Jake nodded, forcing a smile. Harry was a key investor, and his support was needed for the new salon. But when Harry walked in, his face was more serious than usual. Jake, those are great numbers, Harry began, sitting down. But I've heard some things about your family. Rumors are flying around. Jake tensed. What rumors? He asked, trying to keep his voice even. Harry shrugged, but his gaze was sharp. People are saying that Laura is having an affair with your friend, that lawyer. I'm not a gossip, but such things can damage a reputation, especially if you're running for city council. Jake felt the blood rush to his face. He squeezed the pen so hard it cracked. That's nonsense, Harry, he said. Laura's taking painting classes. That's all. I believe you, Harry said, holding up his hands. But you know Houston. People like to gossip. Just be careful. Harry left, and Jake sat there, staring into space. The rumors, he'd known they would start after the barbecue, but he hadn't expected them to reach the investors. His reputation, his business, his campaign, everything depended on the image of the perfect family. And now that image was crumbling. Laura arrived at the gallery at 6 in the evening. Her jeans and t-shirt were comfortable as usual, but she felt out of place. The conversation with Jake the night before, Emma's words about Robert, all of it hung over her like a cloud. She just wanted to paint, but now every step felt like a minefield. Inside, the gallery was just as bright, but Laura noticed two of the women in her group, Marge and Claire, whispering as they looked at her. As she approached, they fell silent, smiling too politely. "Laura, are you alone today?" Marge asked with a hint of suggestion in her voice. As usual, Laura replied, trying not to show her irritation. "Why?" "Nothing," Claire said, adjusting her hair. "We just heard you're the star of the class now." Laura felt her cheeks burn. She was about to answer, but Robert entered the room carrying a box of paints. "Laura, will you help me distribute them?" he asked, not noticing the tension. "Of course," she replied, glad for the change of subject. They passed out materials, and Laura tried not to look at Marge and Claire. But their whispers continued, and she could feel their eyes. The class began, and Laura tried to focus on her sketch, a field of sunflowers, but her hand was shaking. Robert came over, noticing her tension. "Is everything okay?" he asked quietly, so that the others wouldn't hear. "Yeah, it's just a hard day," Laura answered without looking at him. "If you want to talk, I'm here," he said, and his voice was sincere. Laura nodded, but inside she was fighting the urge to tell him everything about the fight with Jake, about Emma's suspicions, about her doubts. But she remained silent. Robert was part of the problem, even if he didn't know it. Meanwhile, Emma was sitting in the school library, skipping her last period. She was scrolling through her phone, but her thoughts were on her family. She hadn't found anything in her mom's messages yesterday, but that didn't calm her down. Today at school, she heard a classmate whisper to another, "I heard Emma's mom is having an affair." Emma pretended not to hear, but inside she was seething. She opened a chat with Kate and wrote, "People talking about mom. It's not funny anymore." Kate replied, "Maybe you should ask her directly." Emma frowned. She had tried before, and her mother had waved her off. But now that word had reached school, she couldn't sit idly by. She decided to talk to her father, but not today. He was too angry after the argument. Jake, back at the office after his meeting with Harry, couldn't work. The investor's words were spinning in his head. He knew rumors were poison, especially in their circle. His city council campaign was just getting started, and any hint of scandal could ruin it all. He opened his phone and dialed the number of a private investigator a friend had recommended. "Rick, this is Jake Collins," he said when they answered. "I need a favor. I want you to follow my wife. Nothing serious, just checking." "Got it," Rick replied. "Give me a couple of days. What should I look for?" "Anything to do with Robert Wilson," Jake said, his voice cold. "Courses, meetings, everything." He hung up and felt like a traitor. Following Laura was wrong, but he didn't know how else to calm down. He told himself it was for their good, for the family. Laura returned home at 9 o'clock. Jake was in the living room watching football. Tommy was asleep and Emma was sitting in her room. Laura wanted to pass by, but Jake called out to her. "How are the courses?" he asked, without looking up from the screen. "Fine," Laura replied, taking off her jacket. "I'm tired." "Were you chatting with Robert again?" he asked, his voice sharp. Laura froze. "Jake, stop," she said, turning to him. "I'm not going to have to make excuses every time I leave the house. I'm not going to be the idiot who people whisper behind my back," he barked, standing up. "People are talking, Laura. My investors, my clients. Do you even know what that means?" Laura felt her heart squeeze. "People say," she asked again, "and you believe the gossip and not me?" "I believe my eyes," Jake said. "You've changed, and it all started with this class, with him." Laura wanted to scream, but she held back. "I changed because I was tired of being your shadow," she said, her voice shaking. "But if all you see in me is a traitor, that's your problem." She went upstairs, leaving Jake alone. He watched her go, clenching his fists. He knew he had gone too far, but he couldn't stop. The rumors, Robert, Laura's independence, all of it was a threat, and he didn't know how to deal with it. Emma, coming home from school, heard snatches of the conversation. She hid around the corner, listening to Dad accuse Mum. Her heart was pounding. Word had reached the school, Dad's clients, it was worse than she thought. She went to her room and texted Kate. Dad knows about Mum and Bob. It's over. Laura sat in her studio, looking at her sketch of sunflowers. Her hands were shaking. She wanted to paint, but she couldn't. Jake's words, the whispers in the gallery, Emma's suspicions, all of it was suffocating her. She loved her family, but for the first time she wondered if she could stay in this marriage. She put down her brush and closed her eyes, feeling the loneliness wash over her. Tommy, lying in his room, heard his mother go into the studio. He was not sleeping, although it was late. His sketchbook was on the bed, but he was not drawing. Instead, he was staring at the ceiling, thinking about how his heroes would save his family. But in real life, there were no heroes, and that was what scared him most. Jake finished his beer and turned off the TV. He thought about the detective, about Laura, about his campaign. He had always been proud of his family, but now it was becoming his weakness. He told himself that he would find the truth, no matter the cost. But deep down, he was afraid of what he might find. Emma sat in the Collins' backyard, leaning against an old oak tree. Her headphones were blaring punk rock, but she wasn't listening. Her mind was on her family. The rumors she'd heard at school about her mom and Robert, her dad's anger, her mom's detachment, it all played in her head like a broken record. Emma was angry, but most of all, she was afraid that their family would fall apart. She took off her headphones and opened her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She knew her mom's password 0312, Tommy's birthday. She hadn't found anything in the messages yesterday, but now she decided to dig deeper. At home, Laura was getting ready for her art class. She wore a light blouse and jeans, but her movements were mechanical. After her argument with Jake on Tuesday and his comment about the rumors yesterday, she felt like she was under surveillance. Even in the gallery, where she had sought peace, the whispers of Marge and Claire reminded her that the city was watching. Laura looked at her sketch of sunflowers on the kitchen table. She considered taking it with her, but decided against it. She needed to focus, not drag more tension home. "Tommy, have you done your homework?" she called, peering into the living room. Tommy sat on the couch, drawing in a notebook. His hero was now fighting a huge robot. "Almost," he answered without looking up. "Okay, I'll be back by 9, Laura said. "Daddy will be home soon." Tommy nodded, but his heart sank. He hated it when his mother went to classes. Not because he didn't like her drawing, but because it made his father gloomier. He wanted to tell her to stay, but he didn't. Laura left, not noticing Emma watching her from the garden. As soon as the door closed, Emma crept into the house. Her mother's phone was lying on the kitchen table, forgotten in her rush. Emma grabbed it, entered the password, and opened her messages. The chat with Robert was upstairs. She scrolled through the messages, links to exhibitions, discussions of watercolors, a few emojis. Nothing explicit, but the tone was warm, too warm for just a mentor. "You inspire me to get back into color," Laura wrote in one message. "You're a star without me," Robert replied, adding a winking smiley. Emma gritted her teeth. It wasn't proof of cheating, but she didn't like it. She considered texting Kate, but decided against it. Instead, she snapped a picture of the screen and put the phone away. She needed to figure out what to do. At the gallery, Laura tried to concentrate on her lesson. Robert was explaining oil painting techniques, but her mind was elsewhere. She was mechanically applying brush strokes, but her sunflowers looked dull. Robert noticed her detachment and approached. "Laura, you're not on duty today," he said quietly, so the others wouldn't hear. "Did something happen?" Laura looked at him. His eyes were sincere, and she suddenly wanted to tell him everything about Jake, about the rumors, about how she was drowning under their pressure. But she held back. "Just tired," she replied, forcing a smile. "It's okay." Robert nodded, but did not back down. If anything, I'm always ready to listen, he said. You know. Thank you, Laura replied, her voice barely audible. She turned back to her canvas, but her thoughts were in disarray. Robert had been kind, too kind. She didn't want to give rise to gossip, but his attention warmed her. It frightened her. She knew she should keep her distance, but she wasn't sure she wanted to. Meanwhile, Jake was sitting in his office at the dealership. His phone buzzed a text from Rick, the detective. Got a report. Meet me in an hour, Jake replied. Yeah, at the coffee shop on Main Street. He felt bad hiring someone to follow Laura, but the rumors that had reached the investors left him no choice. He needed the truth. At the cafe, Rick, a man with tired eyes and a wrinkled shirt, handed Jake a thin folder. Nothing serious yet, he said, sipping his coffee. Your wife goes to classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Wilson is the leader. They say they have coffee after class. No hotels, no secluded places. But they are close. They laugh a lot, touch each other, nothing overt, but you get the idea. Jake opened the folder. Photo, Laura and Robert leaving the cafe, she laughing, he holding the door. Another, they were in the gallery, standing by the canvas, their shoulders almost touching. Jake clenched his jaw. That's all? He asked. For now, yes, Rick replied. Should I continue? Yeah, Jake said, not looking at him. And dig deeper. Rick nodded and left. Jake sat there, looking at the photo. He told himself it didn't prove anything. But each picture was a sting. Laura, his Laura, looked happier than she had ever been with him. He stuffed the folder into his briefcase and drove home, anger mingling with pain. Emma, back at the house, was waiting for her mother. She was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, but her thoughts were preoccupied with her correspondence. When Laura came in, Emma blurted out, Mom, we need to talk. Laura wearily took off her bag. Emma, I just got back. What happened? Emma stood up, crossing her arms. I know about you and Bob, she said, her voice shaking. I saw your texts. You tell him how he inspires you. What is that, Mom? Are you cheating on Dad? Laura froze as if she had been struck. Emma, have you checked my phone? She asked, trying to speak calmly. So what? Emma barked. Everyone says you're having an affair. At school, in town, even Dad knows. You're ruining our family. Laura felt the ground slipping from under her feet. She took a step toward her daughter, but Emma retreated. Emma, listen, Laura said, her voice firm despite the pain. I'm not cheating on Dad. Robert is my mentor, my friend. We're talking about art. That's all. Then why are you so happy with him? Emma shouted. And at home, you're like a zombie. Laura gasped. Her daughter's words were true, and it hurt. I'm not a zombie, she said, but her voice cracked. I'm trying to find myself, Emma. I love you, but I need something of my own. Emma shook her head, her eyes shining with tears. You're lying, she said, and ran out of the kitchen. Laura was left alone, her hands shaking. She sat at the table, covering her face. Emma had seen the messages. Jake was suspicious of her. The city was whispering. She wanted to scream, but instead she just sat there, feeling her world crumble. Jake returned home later. He found Laura in the kitchen, but he didn't mention the report. Instead, he muttered, Is there dinner? In the refrigerator, Laura answered without looking at him. He nodded and went into the living room. The photos in the folder burned him, but he wasn't ready for another scandal. Not today. He turned on the TV, trying to drown out his thoughts. Tommy, lying in his room, heard Emma screaming at her mother. He didn't understand everything, but the word cheating stuck in his head. He knew it was bad. He clutched his notebook and started drawing, but his character now looked weak, lost. Tommy wanted everything to go back to how it used to be, but he didn't know how. Emma sat on her bed, hugging her knees. She felt guilty for yelling at her mom, but it felt like a lie. She opened a chat with Kate and wrote, Mom says there's nothing, but I don't believe her. What should I do? Kate replied, Talk to Dad. Emma frowned. She didn't want to, but maybe it was the only way. Jake Collins sat in the rusty Spur bar on the outskirts of town, sipping bourbon. The wooden walls of the place were covered with old license plates and cowboy photos, and Chris Stapleton's deep voice was coming from the speakers. Jake had chosen this place for a reason. It was far from his usual circle, where no one would whisper about his family. Today, he had invited Robert Wilson, a friend of his since youth, here for a man-to-man talk. But anger was boiling in his chest, fueled by the detective's report and Emma's accusations from yesterday. Robert walked into the bar a little late. His dark shirt was unbuttoned at the top, and his face looked tired but friendly. He spotted Jake in the corner and raised his hand in greeting. "Hey, Collins, it's been a while since we've seen each other in places like this," Robert said, sitting down opposite. "What's the occasion?" Jake forced himself to smile, but his eyes were cold. "I just wanted to chat," he replied, pushing the glass away. "Life, you know, gets busy." Robert nodded, ordering a beer from the waitress. "That's for sure. How are you doing? The salon, the campaign, everything is going well." "I'm holding up for now," Jake said, looking at Robert. "And you? Courses at the gallery, divorce. Aren't you bored?" Robert chuckled, but his smile was forced. "Divorce is crap, to be honest. But the courses save you. There are good people there, Laura, for example." He paused, noticing how Jake squeezed his glass. "Let's be honest, Bob," Jake said, lowering his voice. "What's going on with you and my wife?" Robert froze, his beer untouched. "What are you talking about?" he asked, frowning. "Don't pretend," Jake said, his voice sharpening. "I see the way you talk, the way you hang around her. The photos, the texts, the coffee after class. Do you think I'm blind?" Robert leaned back in his chair, his face becoming serious. "Jake, you're talking nonsense," he said. "Laura is my friend, and so are you. We talk about art, about life. She's talented, and I support her. That's all." "Support?" Jake snapped, leaning forward. "You're messing with my family, Bob. People are talking, investors, even my daughter is suspicious. You're destroying everything I've built." The bar was noisy, but their corner was an island of silence. Robert looked at Jake, a mixture of hurt and anger flashing in his eyes. "I'm not ruining anything," he said, his words precise. "If your family is falling apart, look at yourself, Jake. Laura's been your shadow for years, and you never noticed. She's finally breathing, and you blame me?" Jake felt the blood rush to his face. "Don't you dare tell me how to be a husband," he said, gritting his teeth. "Do you know what I've done for her? For all of them?" "You know what she wants," Robert replied, not backing down. "She wants you to see her, not just your deals. I'm not sleeping with her, Jake. I'm not like that. But yes, I admire her. She deserves more than to be a decoration." The words hit Jake like a fist. He stood up, clenching his fists. "Get out of my life," he said, his voice shaking, "and stay away from Laura." Robert looked at him, shook his head, and stood up. "You're ruining everything yourself," he said quietly, and left, slamming the door. Jake stood there, feeling the eyes of the bar patrons sweep over him. He sat down, finished his bourbon, and ordered another. His heart was pounding. Robert hadn't admitted to the affair, but his words about Laura, about her deserving more, stung. Jake knew he'd gone too far, but there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Laura was at home in her studio. She was trying to work on the sunflowers, but the brush wouldn't move. She felt crushed after her conversation with Emma the day before. Her daughter had accused her of cheating on her, Jake was looking at her like an enemy, and the city was whispering behind her back. She wanted to call Robert to ask for advice, but she stopped herself. That would be a mistake. Instead, she went down to the kitchen to make tea. Tommy sat at the table, drawing. His sketchbook was open to the scene of the superhero falling from the sky. Laura noticed how hunched he was, and her heart sank. "Tommy, are you okay?" she asked, sitting down next to him. "Yeah," he muttered, not looking at her. "Hey, look at me," Laura said softly. "What happened?" Tommy sighed and put his pencil down. "Why are you and Daddy always angry?" he asked. "And why did Emma yell at you?" Laura froze. She didn't want Tommy to know about her fights with Jake or about Emma's suspicions. "We're not mean," she said, trying to smile. "It's just, adults argue sometimes, but we love you and everything will be fine." Tommy looked at her, his eyes full of doubt. "You won't leave?" he asked quietly. Laura hugged him, feeling tears welling up. "Never," she said. "I'll always be with you and Emma." Tommy nodded, but didn't look convinced. He went back to his drawing, and Laura went into the living room, feeling like the worst mother in the world. Emma was in her room, scrolling through her phone. She was still mad at her mom after yesterday, but Laura's words about her finding herself had gotten to her. Emma knew her mom wasn't happy. She'd seen it in her tired eyes at all of Dad's parties. But the thought of her mom leaving scared her. She opened up Kate's chat and wrote, "Mom swears it's nothing, but I don't know if I should believe her. Dad needs to know." Kate responded, "Are you sure? This could ruin everything." Emma frowned. She wasn't sure, but she couldn't sit back. Jake got home after midnight. Laura was already asleep, and the house was quiet. He went into the living room, poured himself a whiskey, and sat down on the couch. His thoughts were in disarray. Talking to Robert hadn't given him any answers, only made him angrier. He pulled out his phone and opened the photo the detective had given him Laura and Robert in a cafe, her smiling, his hand on the door. He squeezed the phone so hard the screen flickered. Laura was awakened by the sound of footsteps. She went downstairs and saw Jake sitting in the dark. "You're late," she said, tying her robe. "I was dating Bob," he answered without looking at her, his voice hoarse from the alcohol. Laura tensed. "And how did it go?" she asked, although she was afraid of the answer. "Bad," Jake said. "I told him to stay away from you, and I advise you to do the same." Laura felt her heart squeeze. "Jake, you can't stop me from socializing," she said, raising her voice. "Robert is my friend. This is a course, not a romance." "Friend?" Jake snapped, standing up. "You think I'm an idiot? The whole town is saying you're sleeping with him, Laura. My investors, my clients, everyone." Laura choked. "And you believe the gossip and not me?" she cried. "I'm trying to live, Jake, and you only see your reputation." "And you see only yourself," he replied. "You leave your family for your paintings, and this bastard." Laura felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm not abandoning my family," she said, her voice shaking. "But I won't live for your ambitions. If you can't live with that, that's your problem." She turned and walked into the guest room, slamming the door. Jake stood there, clutching his glass. He wanted to follow her, but anger and whiskey held him in place. He collapsed on the couch, feeling everything crumble. Laura lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Her heart was pounding. Jake had crossed a line, banning her from the course, accusing her of cheating on her. She knew she had to set boundaries with Robert, but the thought of giving up the gallery was unbearable. It was her salvation, her heir. But the price was becoming too high. Tommy, awakened by the screams, hid under the blanket. He heard the word novel and did not know what it meant, but he felt that it was bad. His notebook was lying on the floor, and he did not want to draw. For the first time, his characters seemed useless. Emma, overhearing the argument from her room, clutched her phone. She wanted to tell her dad about the messages, but now she was afraid. Their family was already in turmoil, and her words could ruin everything. She texted Kate, "Mom and Dad are yelling again. Roman too don't know what to do." Kate replied, "Hang in there. Maybe it will pass." But Emma didn't believe it. Jake, alone, finished his whiskey. He thought about Robert, about Laura, about his life. He had always considered himself a good husband, but now he doubted himself. But he knew one thing for sure: he would not give in. He would find a way to regain control, even if it broke his heart. Laura, lying in the dark, thought about tomorrow. She didn't want to lose her family, but she couldn't lose herself anymore. She decided to take the course, despite Jake's prohibition. This was her challenge, her fight. But she knew it was only the beginning. The sun was filtering through the curtains, illuminating the kitchen where Laura was cooking eggs. Her movements were automatic. Crack the eggs, stir, put the pan on the fire. But her mind was elsewhere. After the fight with Jake on Friday, when he forbade her to go to class and accused her of having an affair with Robert, she had slept in the spare room. They did not speak, passing each other like strangers. Laura felt on the edge, between the desire to keep the family together and the need to be herself. Tommy sat at the kitchen table, hunched over his notebook. His pencil moved slowly, drawing a superhero with a cracked shield. The 10-year-old boy with his bangs unkempt looked lost. The screams of his parents he had heard in the night echoed in his head. He didn't understand words like affair or cheating, but he knew his mom and dad were unhappy, and that scared him more than the monsters in his comic books. "Tommy, breakfast is ready," Laura said, placing a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "I don't want to," he muttered, without looking up from his drawing. Laura sighed as she sat down opposite him. She noticed his fingers tightening around the pencil, and her heart sank. "Hey, what are you drawing?" she asked, trying to speak lightly. "A new hero." Tommy shrugged. "He's broken," he said quietly. "He can't save everyone." Laura looked at the drawing. The superhero Tommy usually portrayed as strong stood under a black sky, his shield shattered. She felt a pang of guilt. Her fights with Jake, her absences from classes, all of it was taking its toll on her son. "Even heroes break sometimes," she said, touching his hand. "But they get fixed, you know. They get stronger." Tommy looked at her, his eyes full of doubt. "Will you and Dad fix it?" he asked. Laura froze. She wanted to lie, to say that everything would be fine, but the words stuck. "We're trying," she finally answered. "I love you, Tommy. And Dad does too." He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. Laura stood up to pour herself some coffee, feeling helpless. She knew she was hurting her son, but she didn't know how to stop it. Jake was at the dealership, even though he could have taken the day off. He sat in his office, staring at his computer screen, but the sales figures wouldn't come to mind. The conversation with Robert at the bar, his words about Laura deserving more, had burned. Jake had been up half the night scrolling through the photo the detective had sent him. Laura laughing with Robert, her hand on his shoulder. He told himself he'd find proof, but deep down he was afraid of the truth, and even more afraid that the truth was his own fault. Emma walked down to the kitchen, grabbing an apple. Her black jeans and Nirvana t-shirt emphasized her rebellious attitude. She had heard her parents fight the day before, and knew that Dad had banned Mom from going to class. Her own conversation with Laura on Thursday, when she had accused her mother of cheating on her, had left a bad taste in her mouth. Emma was still angry, but now she was doubtful. Her mother seemed sincere, but the messages with Robert and the rumors at school were troubling her. "Emma, eat properly," said Laura, noticing her. "I'm not hungry," Emma muttered, biting into an apple. "Are you going to class today?" Laura tensed. "No, today is a day off," she answered, trying to speak evenly. "And what are you doing?" "It's nothing," Emma said and went to her room. Laura watched her go. She knew Emma was watching her, and it hurt. Her daughter, her baby, now saw her as the enemy. Laura turned back to Tommy, but he had already gone to his room, leaving his notebook on the table. She opened it and saw a new drawing. A superhero standing over a ruined city, his eyes empty. Laura closed the notebook, feeling tears welling up. Tommy locked himself in his room, lying on his bed. He didn't want to draw, but he didn't know what else to do. His heroes always won, but now he didn't believe in them. He remembered hearing his dad yell at his mom the day before and his mom slamming the door. He decided he had to save them. He got up, took a clean sheet of paper, and started drawing a comic book not about fighting, but about family. On the first page, Mom and Dad were holding hands, and he and Emma were smiling. This was his dream, and he wanted to give it to his parents. At the car dealership, Jake received a call from Harry, an investor. "Jake, I heard you had a falling out with Wilson," Harry said without preamble. "And the rumors about Laura continue to circulate. It's bad for the campaign. Jake squeezed the phone. I'll handle it, Harry, he said. It's personal. Private becomes public, Harry replied. Slap yourself on the cheeks and decide. Jake hung up, anger rising. He opened the desk drawer where the detective's file was and pulled out a photo. Laura and Robert in a cafe, her smile, his gaze. He told himself it meant nothing, but he couldn't believe it. Suddenly, he remembered Tommy, his quiet voice yesterday when he asked if his mother was home. Jake knew his son was suffering, and that hit him harder than the rumors. He decided to go home and talk to Laura, but he didn't know where to start. Laura, left alone in the kitchen, called her friend Sarah. Sarah, I don't know what to do, she said, barely holding back tears. Jake thinks I'm cheating. Emma doesn't believe me. And Tommy, he just keeps quiet, but I can see how much pain he's in. Laura, breathe, Sarah said. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just drawing. And Jake, he's scared. Men are like that when they lose control. He forbade me to go to classes, Laura admitted. And I'm thinking about divorce. The words escaped, and Laura froze. She hadn't meant to say it, but the thought kept coming to her mind. Divorce is serious, Sarah said. Talk to him, and to the kids. They need to know you love them. Laura nodded, though Sarah couldn't see her. She hung up and went into her studio, but she didn't paint. Instead, she sat looking at her sunflowers and thinking about Tommy, Emma, Jake. She didn't want to lose them, but she couldn't lose herself anymore. Tommy finished his comic. On the last page, his hero, a little boy with a pencil, connected his mom and dad, making them smile. He decided to give the comic to his parents that evening. He went down to the kitchen, but Laura was in the workshop. Tommy left the comic on the table and went to play in the garden, hoping that his plan would work. Jake returned home for dinner. He found Laura in the studio, sitting in front of a canvas. We need to talk, he said, standing in the doorway. Laura looked at him, her eyes tired. About what? She asked. About how you don't trust me. About us, Jake said, stepping inside. About Tommy. He's suffering, Laura. I found his notebook. His drawings. They're dark. It's because of us. Laura felt her heart squeeze. I know, she said quietly. I saw his comic. He's afraid we'll break up. Jake sat down on the chair, looking at the floor. I don't want him to grow up without a family, he said. But I can't live with these rumors. With you and Bob. Laura stood up, her voice firmer. How many times do I have to tell you there's nothing? She asked. You hired a detective, Jake. You're following me. How can I live with that? Jake looked up, his face a mixture of anger and pain. How can I live when my wife is only happy with someone else? He asked. Laura gasped. She wanted to scream, but instead she said, I'm happy when I paint. Not with Robert, but you don't see it. They fell silent, looking at each other. The moment was interrupted by Tommy running into the workshop. Mom, Dad, I gave you a present, he said, holding up a comic book. Laura and Jake turned around. Tommy handed them a notebook, open to the page where their family stood together, smiling. It's you, he said, his voice shaking. You shouldn't quarrel. Laura took the comic book, her eyes filling with tears. She hugged Tommy, feeling him tremble. Thank you, baby, she said. It's beautiful. Jake looked at the drawing and his throat tightened. He put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. You're a good boy, champion, he said hoarsely. We'll try. Tommy nodded and ran away, leaving his parents alone. Laura looked at Jake, but he looked away. I don't know what to do next, he said. But for Tommy's sake, I'll try. Me too, Laura replied, but her voice was empty. Jake went into the living room, and Laura stayed with the comic. She knew that their attempts might not work. She went back to the sunflowers, but she didn't draw. Instead, all she thought about was Tommy, his fear, and how her choices were hurting him. Emma, sitting in her room, heard Tommy talking to his parents. She knew about his comic. He showed her the sketch that morning. Her heart sank, but she was still angry at her mother. She opened a chat with Kate and wrote, Tommy is trying to make peace between them, but I don't believe that Mom is telling the truth. Kate replied, "Give them a chance." Emma frowned. She wanted to believe, but she couldn't. Tommy returned to his room feeling relieved. He thought his comic would help. He started a new drawing of his character fixing the shield, hoping it would become true. Laura and Jake spent the rest of the day apart. He went to the car dealership, she stayed home, but both were thinking about Tommy. Tensions in the Collins household reached a new peak. After Friday's argument, when Jake banned Laura from attending class, and Saturday's conversation over Tommy's comic, Laura and Jake kept their distance, exchanging only the necessary phrases. Tommy, whose drawing had briefly softened his parents, returned to his superheroes, but his anxiety remained. Emma, however, could no longer remain silent. Her anger, fueled by rumors, messages with Robert, and her parents' quarrels, burst forth, pushing her to take action that shook the family. Emma sat in her room, lying on her bed. Her headphones were blasting punk rock, but she wasn't listening. She replayed the last few days in her head. Her mother's lies about Robert, her father's accusations, the whispers at school. Yesterday, she had seen Tommy's comic book and heard him beg his parents not to fight. She felt bad for her brother, but her own anger was stronger. She opened her phone and reread the screenshot of Laura and Robert's texts. "You inspire me." The words burned. Emma knew she had to do something. She texted her friend Kate, "I can't take this anymore. I'm going to talk to Dad today." Kate replied, "Are you sure? This could break everything." Emma gritted her teeth. She was sure. Downstairs, Laura was making dinner, chicken and vegetables, trying to keep her hands busy so she wouldn't have to think. She'd decided to take the class on Tuesday, despite Jake's orders. Her sunflowers in the workshop were nearly finished, and she felt she couldn't give them up. But every glance at Tommy, every cold exchange with Jake, reminded her that the price of her freedom was mounting. She looked at the kitchen table, where Tommy's comic book lay, and her heart sank. She wanted to be a good mother, but she didn't know how. Jake was in the living room, flipping through the sports channel, but his mind was elsewhere. The conversation with Robert at the bar, the detective's report, Harry's words about reputation, all of it weighed on him. He'd seen Tommy's pain yesterday when he'd shown him his comic, and it had made him think. He loved Laura, but her new life, the course, Robert, this independence felt like a betrayal. He told himself he'd talk to her today, but he didn't know how to start without causing another row. Tommy was sitting in his room, drawing. His new hero was fixing the shield, like he promised himself yesterday. He hoped his comic would help his parents, but their silence today scared him. He heard Emma getting mad at her mom this morning, and that made it worse. Tommy wanted everything to go back to the old days, when he and his dad played ball and his mom baked cookies. He clutched his pencil and continued drawing, hoping his heroes would find a way out. Emma walked down to the kitchen, her sneakers squeaking on the floor. Laura turned around, noticing her daughter's tense face. "Emma, dinner is soon," she said, trying to smile. "Do you want to help?" "No," Emma replied sharply. "I need to talk to you." Laura turned off the stove and turned to face her. "Okay," she said, feeling a chill. "What happened?" Emma crossed her arms, her eyes shining. "I know you're lying," she said. "You say there's nothing wrong with Bob, but I've seen you talking to him. I've seen him texting you. You're ruining the family, Mom." Laura felt her heart skip a beat. "Emma, I already explained," she said, trying to sound calm. "Robert is my mentor. We are friends. I am not doing anything bad." "Friends?" Emma snapped. "Do you think I'm stupid? Everyone at school says you're sleeping with him. Dad's angry, Tommy's scared, and all you think about is your paintings." Laura gasped. Her daughter's words were like a knife. "Emma, stop," she said, raising her voice. "I love you and Tommy more than anything, and I'm not cheating on Daddy. Why don't you believe me?" "Because you're different," Emma screamed, and her voice broke. "You're only happy there, with him, and at home you don't see us." Laura froze, unsure of what to say. Emma ran out of the kitchen, leaving her alone. Laura leaned against the counter, her hands shaking. She wanted to run after her daughter, but she couldn't. Emma was right, she was happy in the class, and that made the guilt even heavier. Emma ran to her room and slammed the door. Her heart was pounding. She hated herself for screaming, but she couldn't stop. She opened her phone and texted Kate, "Mom is lying again. I'm going to Dad's." She went down to the living room where Jake was watching TV. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, standing in the doorway. Jake turned off the sound and looked at her. Her face was red, her eyes were shining. "What's wrong, Em?" he asked, sitting up straighter. Emma took a deep breath. "It's about Mom," she said. She's with Bob. I saw their texts. She says he inspires her. And everyone at school says they're having an affair." Jake felt his stomach clench. He knew about the messages from the detective, but hearing it from his daughter was worse. "Emma, are you sure?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't want her to leave us, Dad, but she's lying." Jake stood up, his face darkening. "Go to your room," he said. "I'll sort it out." Emma nodded and walked away, feeling a mixture of relief and fear. She had done what she thought was right, but now she was afraid of the consequences. Jake walked into the kitchen where Laura was finishing dinner. "Laura, is it true?" he asked, his voice icy. "Emma saw your messages with Bob. Are you telling him that he inspires you?" Laura turned around, her face turning pale. "Jake, are you serious?" she said. "Emma checked my phone again, and you believe her and not me?" "What am I supposed to think?" he barked. "My daughter comes to me in tears, the whole town is whispering, and all you do is defend your mentor." Laura threw the spoon on the table. "I'm tired of making excuses," she cried. "Yes, Robert supports me. He sees me as a person, not just a wife and mother, but I'm not sleeping with him, Jake. Why can't you believe me?" "Because you're not the Laura I knew," he replied. "You're leaving us for your courses for him." Laura gasped, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice breaking. "But I can't live just for you. If you don't understand that, I don't know what to do with us." She ran out of the kitchen, leaving Jake alone. He slammed his fist on the countertop, feeling everything crumble. He wanted to believe Laura, but Emma's words, the detective's photo, the rumors, all spoke against her. Emma, overhearing the argument from the hallway, felt her throat tighten. She wanted to fix it, but she made it worse. She went to her room and texted Kate. "I told Dad. They're yelling again. I'm stupid." Kate wrote back, "You wanted to help. Breathe." But Emma couldn't breathe. She was afraid she'd destroyed the family. Tommy, sitting in his room, heard the screams. He clutched his notebook where his hero was fixing the shield, but now it seemed stupid. He hid under the covers, willing it all to go away. His comic had failed, and he didn't know what else to do. Laura locked herself in her studio, her hands shaking. She stared at her sunflowers, but she couldn't draw. Emma, her daughter, had betrayed her by telling Jake about the messages. Jake saw her as nothing but a traitor. She wanted to call Sarah, but instead she sat on the floor, hugging her knees. She knew she had to do something with Robert, with the course with Jake. But now all she could do was cry. Jake stayed in the kitchen, looking at his half-eaten dinner. He thought about Emma's words, about Laura, about Tommy. His family was falling apart, and he didn't know how to save it. He took out his phone and texted the detective, "Keep digging. I need evidence." He felt like a traitor, but he saw no other way. Emma lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. She hated herself for telling her dad, but she couldn't forgive her mom. She was afraid their family would never be the same. Emma lay on the bed with her legs up on the wall. "Emma, dinner is in 20 minutes, Laura called from the kitchen. "I'm not hungry," Emma barked, slamming the door. Laura stood at the stove, stirring the sauce for lasagna, a dish Tommy adored. She'd hoped dinner would bring the family together, give them a moment of normalcy. But Emma's anger cut deeper than she'd expected. After their conversation on Thursday, when Emma had accused her of cheating on her by finding the text messages with Robert, Laura had felt targeted. She wanted to explain herself, But her daughter's words, "You're ruining the family," echoed in her head. Laura glanced at her phone. A new text from Robert. "We're trying butter on Tuesday. Will you have some?" She started to answer, but stopped herself. Jake had banned her from the course, and while she had no intention of complying, communicating with Robert now seemed dangerous. Emma opened Instagram. Her classmate Zach had posted a story, an impromptu graffiti show in an abandoned warehouse by the river. Emma knew it was unofficial. The kids were going to paint on the walls without permission. Her parents would be furious if they knew she was going, but she didn't care. She needed to vent her anger, get away from her mom's fake smiles and dad's silence. She texted Zach. "I'm in." "What time?" he replied. "8. Bring a can." Emma rummaged through the closet, found an old can of black paint, stuffed it in her backpack along with her phone and wallet, and pulled on a black hoodie. She went downstairs, trying to be quiet. "Mom, I'm going to see Kate," she shouted, already at the door. "Emma, stop," Laura replied, coming out of the kitchen. "Where are you going? When will you be back?" "By 10, Emma said and ran out, not giving her mother a chance to answer. Laura stared at the closed door, her heart sinking. Emma was drifting away, and Laura didn't know how to get her back. She wanted to call Kate, check, but decided not to push. Emma was already a taut string. Emma took the bus to the river. The abandoned warehouse was buzzing with voices, a dozen teenagers, spray paint, a boombox playing heavy rock. Zach, in a ripped denim jacket, waved at her. "Hey, Collins, you're really here," he called, holding out a can of red spray paint, ready to light it up. "Yeah," Emma replied, feeling the adrenaline drowning out her worries. She stood by the wall where there were already sketches, skulls, letters, abstract lines. Emma shook the can and began to paint, a black silhouette of a girl with a broken heart. She wasn't an artist like her mother, but the paint was an outlet for her anger. Zach and the others cheered, shouting, "That's awesome, Emma." She smiled for the first time that day, feeling free. But the warehouse was near a residential area, and the noise, music, laughter, the hiss of spray cans attracted attention. Someone in the neighborhood called the police. When the sirens began to blare, the crowd panicked. Zach yelled, "Get out!" Emma dropped the can and ran, but tripped over a rusty pipe. A police officer grabbed her sleeve as she tried to stand. "Name?" he asked, shining the flashlight into her face. "Emma Collins," she muttered, her heart pounding. "Age?" he continued. 16, she answered, looking at the ground. "Vandalism on private property," the policeman said. "Call your parents. You're going to the station." Emma felt her stomach clench. She pulled out her phone and dialed her dad. Her mom was the last person she wanted to talk to. Jake answered on the second ring. "Emma, where are you?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Dad, I'm in trouble," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm at the police station." "What?" Jake barked. "Where are you? What have you done?" "By the river, in the warehouse," she muttered. "We were drawing. The police arrived. Please come." Jake hung up and grabbed his keys. Laura, hearing his voice, ran out of the kitchen. "What's wrong with Emma?" she asked, her face turning pale. "She's at the station," Jake said, putting on his jacket. "She was in some warehouse doing graffiti." Laura choked. "Graffiti? Emma?" she asked again. "I'm coming with you." "Stay with Tommy," Jake snapped. "I'll do it myself." Laura wanted to argue, but she nodded, her hands shaking. Emma, her daughter, in police custody for vandalism, it was unthinkable. She blamed herself. If it weren't for her classes, if it weren't for the fights with Jake, Emma wouldn't have snapped. Jake arrived at the station 20 minutes later. Emma was sitting in the waiting room, her hoodie dusty, her eyes red from crying. The cop explained, "Unauthorized graffiti in an abandoned warehouse, public order violation, teenagers dispersed, but Emma was detained for trying to escape. Fine and warning, but parents need to pick her up." "Thank you, officer," Jake said, containing his anger. He looked at Emma and his anger burst out. "What were you doing?" he barked as they walked out to the car. "Graffiti? Police? Do you even know what that looks like? Emma slumped in her seat, fiddling with her sleeve. I'm sorry, Dad, she mumbled. I just wanted to. Go. Get away from what? He asked, starting the engine. From us? From Mom? Emma looked at him, her eyes shining. Everything, she said. You and Mom fight all the time. Everyone says she's having an affair with Bob. I don't know what to think. Jake gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. It's none of your concern, Emma, he said, but his voice softened. We'll figure it out. What if not? She asked, her voice breaking. What if you get divorced? Jake was silent, looking at the road. He wanted to say that everything would be fine, but the words wouldn't come. They drove home in silence. Laura was waiting in the living room, fiddling with the hem of her t-shirt. When Emma walked in, she jumped up. Emma, are you okay? She asked, stepping toward her daughter. Emma recoiled. Don't touch me, she muttered and went to her room. Laura looked at Jake. What happened? She asked, her voice shaking. She was doing graffiti with some street artists, Jake said, taking off his jacket. The police broke up the party. They caught her. Laura closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping. It's my fault, she said. She's angry with me. About the courses, about Robert. Jake looked at her, his face hardening. Maybe if you hadn't run to your friend, she wouldn't have gone to draw on the walls, he said. Laura choked. Are you serious? She screamed. Emma lost it because we both can't handle it, Jake. It's not just me. But it all started with you, he barked. With your courses, with your Bob. Laura felt tears sting her eyes. I'm not cheating on you, she said, her voice shaking. But you don't believe me, and neither does Emma. She turned and walked into the studio, leaving Jake alone. He collapsed on the couch, feeling everything falling apart. Emma at the police, Laura furious, Tommy hiding in his drawings. He didn't know how to fix it. Emma sat on her bed, hugging her knees. She felt stupid. Graffiti was her way of screaming, but now she was making it worse. She opened a chat with Kate and wrote, Got into trouble with the police. Drawing in a warehouse. Dad is furious. It's all because of Mum. Kate replied, Talk to her. Maybe you're wrong. Emma frowned. She wanted to believe her mother, but she couldn't. She lay down, looking at the ceiling, and for the first time in a long time she cried. Laura sat in the studio, looking at the sunflowers. She thought about Emma, about her anger, about her pain. She knew she had to do something about Robert, about the course, about Jake. But the thought of giving up her new life was unbearable. She picked up her phone and texted Robert, We need to talk after the course. She knew it was a risk, but she needed clarity. Robert walked into the room carrying a box of brushes. His dark shirt was slightly wrinkled and his smile was reserved. He spotted Laura at the window and approached her. You're early today, he said. Is everything okay? Laura turned, her eyes tired. Not exactly, she replied. Can we talk after class? In a cafe? Of course, Robert said, frowning. Something serious? Yes, said Laura and walked back to her easel. The class was slow. Laura tried to draw, but her sunflowers looked dull. She could feel the eyes of the other group members, especially Marge, whose whispers about Laura and her lawyer grew louder. Robert explained the oil technique, but Laura barely listened. Her thoughts were at home. Emma locked in her room, Tommy hiding in his comics, Jake with his cold eyes. After the course, Laura and Robert sat down at a cafe across the street. Laura held her coffee but didn't drink it. Robert, we have to be careful, she began. People are talking about us. Jake thinks we're having an affair. Emma too. Robert leaned back in his chair, his face becoming serious. I heard, he said. Words have reached the gallery. I'm sorry, Laura. I didn't mean to drag you into it. It's not your fault, Laura said, but I don't know how to stop it. Jake banned me from taking the course. He hired a detective. Robert frowned. Detective, this is too much. Laura, you don't have to live like this. You deserve freedom. Laura looked into her cup, her fingers tightening around the mug. I don't know what to do, she admitted. I love my family, but I'm suffocating. These courses are the only thing that gives me strength. Robert paused, then leaned closer. I have an offer, he said quietly. I've been offered a job in Dallas. A good company, a new start. Come with me, not as a lover, but as a friend. You'll start over with art with yourself. Laura froze, her heart pounding. Are you serious? She asked. Leave? And my kids? Jake? I know it's hard, Robert said. But you're drowning, Laura. I can see you struggling. Dallas is an opportunity. Laura shook her head. I can't leave the kids, she said. Emma hates me anyway. Tommy's afraid I'll leave. Robert nodded, but his eyes were hard. Think about yourself, he said. You can't live for everyone. I'm leaving in a month. If you decide, I'll help. Laura didn't answer. She finished her coffee, feeling his words echo in her head. Leave? It was madness. But the thought of a new life where she could paint, breathe, be herself was tempting. At home, Laura found Tommy at the kitchen table. He was drawing, but his pencil was moving slowly. Mom, are you going to be gone for long? He asked without looking at her. No, baby, Laura replied, sitting down next to him. I'm here. Tommy looked at her, his eyes full of fear. You're not going to leave, he asked, like in my comic where the hero flew away. Laura hugged him, her throat tightening. I'm not going anywhere, she said, though Robert's words rang in her ears. Emma, standing around the corner, overheard Laura talking to Robert in the cafe. She had secretly followed her mother, hiding on the bus. Her heart was pounding. Go to Dallas? She knew she had to tell Dad, but she was afraid of the consequences. She burst into the kitchen where Laura was sitting. I heard you, Emma shouted. You're going to leave with Bob. Laura jumped up. Emma, were you following me? She asked, her voice shaking. What should I do if you're lying? Emma snapped. I'll tell Dad. Emma, listen, Laura said, stepping toward her. I'm not leaving. I talked to Robert about the course. It's not what you think. I don't believe you, Emma shouted and ran out. Laura remained standing, her hands shaking. Tommy looked at her, his eyes full of tears. Mom, are you really not leaving? He asked. No, Laura said, hugging him, but her voice was weak. Jake returned home late, his face grim. He noticed Laura in the kitchen, but did not speak. Emma locked herself in again, he said, opening the refrigerator. What did you do to her? Nothing, Laura replied, her voice tired. She's angry, just like you. Jake looked at her, wanted to say something, but remained silent. He went into the living room, leaving Laura alone. She sat down, looking at Tommy's comic book on the table. His heroes were holding hands, but Laura felt like her family was falling apart. Emma sat in her room, her heart pounding. She texted Kate, Mom wants to go to Dallas with Bob. I have to tell Dad. Kate replied, Think about it. This could ruin everything. Emma clutched the phone. She didn't want to ruin the family, but she couldn't keep quiet. Laura lay down in the spare room, her thoughts in a whirlwind. Robert's proposal had been crazy, but it had awakened in her a yearning for freedom. She loved the children, but her marriage to Jake was sinking. She didn't know what to choose. Jake, sitting in the living room, thought about Emma, about Tommy, about Laura. He got another text from the detective. Watching Wilson. News coming soon. He felt cornered. Jake was at the dealership, leafing through reports, but his mind was at home. Emma's outburst, the rumors about Laura and Robert, the pressure from investors, it was all weighing on him. He had another text from the detective. Wilson got a job offer in Dallas. Keep an eye on him. Jake clutched the phone. Dallas? It was too far from the usual courses. He felt his anger boiling, but he tried to keep it in check. Emma sat in her room, skipping breakfast. Her hoodie was wrinkled from sleep, and her eyes were red from lack of sleep. She couldn't forget her mother's words in the cafe, I don't know what to do. Emma knew she had to tell her dad about Dallas, but she was afraid of the consequences. She opened a chat with Kate. If I tell Dad, everything will fall apart. but I can't keep quiet. Kate replied, "Think about it, Emma. It's their business." But Emma had already made up her mind. She went down to the living room where Jake was drinking coffee before leaving. Laura was upstairs and Tommy was still asleep. "Dad, we need to talk," Emma said, her voice shaking. Jake looked at her, frowning. "What happened?" he asked, putting his mug down. Emma swallowed. "I heard Mom and Bob yesterday," she said. "He asked her to go to Dallas. Together." Jake froze, his face turning white. "What did you say?" he asked again, his voice hoarse. "She didn't say yes," Emma quickly added, "but she didn't say no either. Dad, I'm afraid she's going to leave." Jake stood up, his hands clenched into fists. "Go to school, Emma," he said, trying to sound calm. "I'll sort this out." Emma nodded and walked away, feeling her heart sink. She did it, but she wasn't sure if it was right. Laura came down to the kitchen when Jake returned from the living room. His face was like a mask. "We need to talk," he said, his voice icy. Laura began, but he interrupted. "Are you going to Dallas with Bob?" he asked, stepping toward her. "Emma heard you." Laura choked. Emma was following again, she said, her voice shaking. "Jake, I'm not going anywhere. Robert suggested it, but you thought about it," he barked. "You're sitting in a cafe with him, laughing, and here I am trying to hold the family together. Get out, Laura. I don't want to see you." Laura froze, her eyes filling with tears. "Are you serious?" she asked. "You're kicking me out because of rumors?" "It's not a rumor," Jake shouted. "It's you, Laura. You're ruining everything." Laura wanted to answer, but the words stuck. She turned, grabbed her bag, and walked out into the rain. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't look back. Jake stayed in the kitchen, his hands shaking. He hadn't meant to, but anger had blinded him. He sat down, staring at the empty table, and felt the emptiness wash over him. He remembered how he and Laura had started out, young and in love, with big plans. Where had it all gone? At the car dealership, Jake was trying to work, but his phone was ringing off the hook. Harry, the investor, called. "Jake, the clients are talking about your wife," he said. "2 contracts are down. Give yourself a slap on the wrist, or your city council campaign is going to go down the drain." Jake squeezed the phone. "I'll figure it out," he muttered and hung up. But he didn't know how. His co-workers were whispering behind his back. Sales were falling. He opened the file from the detective, but the photos of Laura and Robert now seemed trivial. He had thrown his wife out of the house. What had he done? Laura went to see her friend Sarah, the only person she could confide in. Sarah opened the door, her face worried. "Laura, what happened?" she asked, leading her into the living room. "Jake kicked me out," Laura said, her voice breaking. "Emma told him about Dallas. I never meant to leave, Sarah, but he doesn't believe me." Sarah hugged her. "Stay with me," she said. "Give him time. He's scared." Laura nodded, but her thoughts were with the children. Emma hated her. Tommy was afraid she would leave. She didn't know how to protect them. Tommy, returning from school, noticed that his mother was not there. He asked Jake, "Where is Mom?" "She's at her friend's," Jake muttered, not looking at his son. Tommy clutched his notebook and went into the room. His comic wasn't working. He started drawing a new character, but his hands were shaking. Emma, sitting at school, felt guilty. She wrote to Kate, "I told Dad. He threw Mom out." Kate wrote back, "Oh, Emma, try talking to her." But Emma couldn't. She had ruined everything. Jake spent the night in the car dealership looking at their wedding photo. He realized that lost Laura not because of Robert, but because of his control. But how to fix it? He wrote to the detective, "Enough." He wanted the truth, but now he was afraid it was no longer important. Laura lay on Sarah's couch, thinking about her children. She wouldn't go to Dallas, but she didn't know how to get home. Her family was on the brink, and she blamed herself. Emma, falling asleep, decided to find her mother. She didn't want it to end like this, but the fear that she had made things worse did not go away. Tommy prayed for his mother to come back while he was drawing. His characters were powerless, and he felt the same way. Sarah walked into the living room carrying a plate of sandwiches. "Laura, you need to eat," she said, sitting down opposite. "You're like a ghost." "I don't want to," Laura said, her voice weak. "Sarah, I've ruined everything. Emma hates me, Tommy's afraid I'll leave, and Jake, he thinks I betrayed him." Sarah shook her head. "You didn't betray me," she said. "You were trying to find yourself. Jake overdid it, but he's scared. Give him time." Laura nodded, but her heart was clenching. She pulled out her phone and opened a photo of Tommy drawing at the kitchen table. Her son, her baby, thought she was leaving him. She wanted to call him, but she was afraid Jake wouldn't let her. "I have to go to the gallery," Laura said, standing up. "To talk to Robert. It's time to finish this." "Be careful," Sarah said, "and call me if anything happens." Laura put on jeans and a jacket and drove to the gallery. The rain was getting heavier, and the Houston roads were clogged with cars. She listened to the radio, where an old Travis Tritt hit was playing, but the music did not calm her. She thought about Robert, about his offer. Dallas was tempting a new life, art, freedom. But she couldn't leave Emma and Tommy, and, despite everything, Jake. At the gallery, Laura found Robert in the back room, sorting paints. He smiled, but his face turned serious when he saw her eyes. "Laura, are you okay?" he asked, putting the box down. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "We need to talk. Outside." They went out under the awning at the entrance, where the rain pounded the roof. Laura put her hands in her pockets. "Robert, I can't come to class anymore," she said. "The rumors, Jake, my kids, it's ruining everything. And your offer. Dallas, I'm not going. I don't love you, Robert. You inspired me, but I was looking for myself, not you." Robert looked at her. His face was calm, but his eyes showed pain. "I understand," he said. "I'm sorry if I made it worse. I wanted to help you, Laura. You deserve to be happy." "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "But I have to be with my family." Robert nodded. "I'm leaving in a couple of weeks," he said. "If you change your mind, right. But I wish you happiness, Laura. I really do." He handed her an envelope. "This is a letter," he said. "Read it when you're ready." Laura took the envelope, her fingers shaking. They said goodbye, and she left, feeling relieved and empty. She knew she had done the right thing, but that didn't take away the pain. Back at Sarah's, Laura sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. She began writing a letter to Jake. "I didn't cheat on you. I just wanted to live." But the words felt empty, and she didn't finish. Instead, she picked up a canvas and began working on a painting for the show, a family portrait she had in mind. It was all she had left. Tommy was at school, in art class. He drew a picture of the hero fixing a house, but his thoughts were with his mother. She hadn't come home yesterday, and his father had said she was at a friend's. Tommy was afraid she was gone forever. He clutched his pencil and drew his mother next to the hero, hoping it would come true. Emma was at school, but she wasn't listening to the teacher. She felt guilty for telling her dad about Dallas. Mom was gone, and Emma blamed herself. She texted Kate, "I've screwed everything up. Mom's at Sarah's, but I'm afraid she's not coming back." Kate replied, "Call her." Emma dialed Laura's number, but hung up when she didn't answer. She decided to go to Sarah's after school. Jake was at the dealership, but his mind was elsewhere. Customers were whispering, sales were falling, and Harry was calling with more warnings about the campaign. Jake knew the rumors about Laura were ruining his reputation, but now he saw that he had ruined his family. He had thrown Laura out without listening. He looked at their wedding photo on the table and felt his throat tighten. Laura went to Tommy's school event, an exhibition of children's drawings. She stood in the corner, looking at her son's work, a family in the sun, but the mother was drawn paler than the others. Tommy noticed her, but turned away, and it broke her heart. She wanted to go over, but she didn't dare. She went to Sarah, feeling like a stranger. Emma called Laura after school. "Mom, will you come back?" she asked. her voice shaking. "Emma, I'm here," Laura said. "I'm not leaving. Come to Sarah's, we'll talk." Emma hung up, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe her mother, but she was afraid. She decided to go, but she didn't know what to say. Jake came home and found Tommy's comic book in the kitchen. He flipped through the pages, and his eyes filled with tears. He realized that he had lost Laura not because of Robert, but because of himself. He wanted to call her, but he couldn't. Instead, he texted the detective, "Stop the surveillance." The truth no longer mattered. Laura sat at Sarah's, looking at the half-written letter to Jake. She knew she had to go back, but she wasn't sure if she would be accepted. Her family was everything, but she feared she had lost them forever. Jake was at home, in the kitchen, staring at the empty table. His life had been falling apart since he'd kicked Laura out on Wednesday. Word of her affair had reached his clients, sales at the car dealership were down, and Harry, the investor, was calling with more threats to pull his support from the city council campaign. But worst of all, the silence in the house. Tommy barely spoke. Emma locked herself in her room. Jake realized that his control, his anger, had destroyed the family. He texted Laura, "We need to talk. The coffee shop on Main Street, too." She wrote back, "Okay." Laura arrived at the cafe first. She chose a table by the window, ordering a coffee. Her jeans and white blouse were simple, but she felt vulnerable. Jake walked in, his face tired, his eyes dull. He sat down opposite her, holding a mug, but not drinking. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse. I was wrong. Kicking you out was too much." Laura looked at him, her heart sank. "You didn't let me explain," she said. "I didn't cheat, Jake. Robert was a friend. He inspired me to paint. But I'm not leaving. I chose my family." Jake nodded, looking at the table. "I know," he said. "The detective didn't find anything, but I saw how you changed, Laura. You were happy on this course, but not with me. It killed me." Laura choked. "I'm not happy because you can't see me," she said, her voice shaking. "I was your shadow, Jake. The course gave me air, but I didn't want to lose you." Jake looked at her, his eyes full of pain. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid you'd leave, that I wasn't needed. I was building a business, a campaign, thinking it was for us. But I lost you." Laura felt tears sting her eyes. "You haven't lost it," she said. "But you have to trust me. I can't live under your control." Jake squeezed his mug. "I know," he said. "I hired a detective because I was going crazy. I'm sorry, Laura. I want to try again. For the kids, for us." Laura nodded, but her heart was heavy. She wanted to believe, but their wounds were deep. "I wanted to," she said. "But we need time. And help. Maybe therapy." Jake winced, but nodded. "Okay," he said. "Let's try." Their conversation was interrupted by a call. Laura took out her phone school. "Mrs. Collins." The director's voice was stern. "Tommy got into a fight. Please come." Laura turned pale. "What? Tommy?" she asked. "We're going." Jake stood up. "What's wrong with him?" he asked. "Fight," Laura said, grabbing her bag. "Let's go." They arrived at school 15 minutes later. Tommy was sitting in the principal's office, his cheek red and his t-shirt torn. He was staring at the floor, clutching his notepad. The principal, Mrs. Hill, explained. "Tommy hit a boy who said his mother was out. He was defending your family, but we don't tolerate fighting. He's been warned." Laura sat down next to Tommy. "Why did you do this?" she asked softly. Tommy looked up, his eyes full of tears. "He said you left with another," he muttered. "I couldn't keep quiet." Laura hugged him, her throat tightening. "I'm here," she said. "I haven't gone anywhere." Jake looked at his son, feeling guilty. "Sorry, champion," he said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll make it right." Tommy nodded, but his eyes were empty. They drove him home, and the car was silent. Laura held Tommy's hand, and Jake looked at the road. It was the first time they had been together in weeks, but the tension was still there. At home, Laura took Tommy to his room. "Do you want to draw?" she asked. "I don't want to," he muttered and lay down on the bed. Laura walked out, her heart aching. She found Jake in the living room. "It's because of us," she said. "Tommy is suffering because of the rumors." "I know," Jake said. "I stopped the detective, and I agree to therapy. We have to do this." Laura nodded. "I'll find someone," she said. "But, Jake, you have to trust me." "I'm trying," he replied, and his voice was sincere. Emma came home from school to find out about Tommy's fight. She felt guilty her words about Dallas had caused this. She wrote to Kate, "Tommy fought because of rumors. I ruined everything." Kate replied, "Talk to Mom. She's not the enemy." Emma decided she would try, but not today. Laura sat in the living room, looking at Tommy's comic. His characters were still holding hands, and she wanted it to be true. She knew that therapy was just the beginning, and their journey would be long. Jake watched Laura from the kitchen. He wanted to hug her, but he didn't. Instead, he texted Harry, "Family is more important than campaign. I'll figure it out." He knew he had lost control, but for the first time, he wanted his wife back, not his power. Laura sat in the car outside the psychologist's office, gripping the steering wheel. She was afraid that opening up old wounds would destroy them, but for Tommy and Emma, she was willing. Jake was waiting for her at the entrance, his face tense, but he nodded as she approached. "Ready?" he asked, holding the door. "No," Laura answered, but she went in. The office of the psychologist, Dr. Clark, was cozy. A soft sofa, books on the shelves, a window overlooking the park. Dr. Clark, a woman in her 50s with a warm smile, pointed to the chairs. "Tell me why you are here," she said. Laura looked at Jake. "We're losing our family," she began. "I started painting to find myself, but Jake thinks I'm cheating. He kicked me out of the house." Jake gripped the armrests. "I was wrong," he said. "But the rumors, her friendship with another man, I failed, and our children are suffering." Dr. Clark nodded. "Let's start with the past," she said. "What brought you here?" Laura sighed. "I gave up art for my family," she said. "After Emma was born, I stopped painting. I was a wife, a mother, but not myself. Jake didn't see that." Jake looked at her, his eyes darkening. "I tried," he said. "I worked, built a business. But I'm guilty too. When I was young, I cheated on Laura. Once, a long time ago. I thought we'd gotten over it." Laura froze, her throat tightening. She knew about the betrayal. It had been 15 years ago, a random night after an argument. They had agreed to forget, but now the pain was back. "I've forgiven you," she said, her voice shaking. "But you haven't forgiven yourself. You control me because you're afraid I'll leave." Jake lowered his head. "You're right," he said. "I was afraid I wasn't worthy of you. And when you started drawing, I panicked." Dr. Clark looked at them. "You both hold grudges," she said. "Laura, you feel invisible. Jake, you're afraid of loss. It can be overcome, but it takes honesty." Laura nodded, her eyes wet. Jake squeezed her hand, and she didn't pull away. For the first time in months, they felt a fragile connection. At home, Emma sat in her room, scrolling through her phone. She knew her parents were in therapy, and it scared her. After she told Jake about Dallas, Laura had come back, but Emma still didn't trust her. She texted Kate, "They're in therapy. I don't know what's going to happen." Kate responded, "Give them a chance." Emma frowned. She wanted to believe, but she couldn't. Tommy was at school, drawing for art class. His new drawing was grim, a family in the rain, no sun. He showed it to his teacher, who frowned. "Tommy, do you want to talk?" she asked. "No," he muttered. "It's just a drawing." But it wasn't just a picture. It was his fear that Mom and Dad wouldn't get fixed. He clutched the pencil, wishing everything would go back to how it used to be. At the next session, Dr. Clark invited Emma to join in. Emma walked into the room with her arms crossed, her black hoodie and dark eyeliner making her look like an outsider. "Why am I here?" she asked, sitting down. "To talk. said Dr. Clark. What do you feel, Emma? Emma looked at Laura, then at Jake. I'm angry, she said. Mom's always with Bob, and Dad's yelling. Everyone at school says she's cheating. I don't know who to believe. Laura choked. Emma, I didn't cheat, she said. Robert was a friend. I just wanted to paint. Then why did you leave? Emma screamed. I was afraid you would leave us. I don't want to be like you, invisible. Laura felt her heart breaking. I don't want you to be me, she said, her voice breaking. I want you to be happy. Jake looked at Emma. We're both to blame, he said. I didn't listen to my mother. And you, I'm sorry. Emma clenched her fists, but her eyes softened. I just want you to stop fighting, she muttered. Dr. Clark nodded. It's a start, she said. Emma, your feelings are important. Laura, Jake, can you hear her? They nodded, and the session ended. At home, Laura found Tommy's drawing in his backpack, a family in the rain. She showed it to Jake. He's afraid, she said. We have to be better. Jake agreed. He later helped Laura organize the exhibition, and she supported him at a meeting with investors. Are we okay? Laura asked when they were alone. I don't know, Jake replied, but I want to try. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.